Hello everybody, welcome back to another part of the Municipalists by Seth. The room was documenting those days when all U.S. cities were seen as a little more than accumulations of blight. It was a time when the country as a whole was still convinced that low-density homeowners were somehow the solution to every societal ill, and struggling urban areas were left to rot. A photo near the entrance showed an elderly woman crying on a fire escape. In the reflection of the frame's glass, I saw that Owen had changed my disguise yet again. I was now wearing a baggy carpenter jeans with holes in the knees and a stained undershirt. "We're tourists," he said. "Newlyweds." Beside me, Owen had taken on the shape of a beautiful young woman wearing cut-off jean shorts and an oversized Mickey Mouse sweatshirt. My reflection in a glass case revealed that I was also sporting a Toledo mud hen's cap and had thick blonde sideburns that looked like they'd recently been used to mop a floor. "You know I'm from Ohio," I whispered. "This depiction is a little ungenerous. I hate to break it to you, pal, but it's an average to compensate of all the obvious out-of-towner data I just collected downstairs. If you want a more realistic tourist disguise, you'll have to go back down there and skin one. Now follow my lead." We went up to a series of screen-printed posters and pretended to admire a handbill for some band called the Kick Murderers. It was an edgy collection by the Metmo's standards, tucked away in one of the smaller exhibit halls. The place was empty except for a man. He had been studying one of the room's support columns and writing in his notebook, but now seemed distracted by a photograph of an underweight homeless man, shirtless under his army jacket and scowling at the camera. The man lowered his notebook and turned to face the picture, regarding it with what looked like concern. "Excuse me," Owen said suddenly, standing directly behind him. "Can you help me?" The man turned and frowned. "Help you?" Owen waved me over. "Honey," he called out, "he says he can help us." Before the man could object, Owen launched into a long explanation about us being on our honeymoon all the way from Toledo. "We got turned around," Owen said, "and now we don't know the way back to where we're staying." The man looked around the room as if remembering how much work he had to do, but perhaps deciding it would be easier to send us on our way than risk any unpleasantness. Asked Owen for the name of our hotel. "We forgot it," he said, the delicate face of the projection taking on an exaggeratedly pitiful expression with eyes that now seemed almost comically large. "Well, if you don't, how am I supposed to? It's nearby." The man pinched the bridge of his nose and, to my incredible surprise, began guessing the names of hotels. When he mentioned the Tennyson, Owen squealed and clapped his hands. "Oh, that's the one." He pointed down to the man's notepad. "Do you think you could draw us our map?" The man shook his head in disbelief and proceeded to draw the intersection of West 48th Street and 7th Avenue. Owen gave me a matter-of-fact look and pointed discreetly over the man's shoulder, where he was projecting the same punching animation as before. When Owen saw I didn't want to do it, he raised his eyebrows and began running the animation at twice its previous speed. The man was almost finishing with his map when Owen projected "Do it" against the far wall in letters a full story tall. The words moved closer, began to flash. The man looked up from his notebook and I hit him in the face as hard as I could. When I made contact with the bridge of his nose, I felt the cartilage give away, and I inadvertently shouted out an apology as he fell to the floor with his face in his hands, blood streaming through his fingers. Owen shouted at him, telling him to stay out of the history museum, then ordered me to grab his notebook. I tucked it into my suit coat, and we ran toward the heavy tarp at the far end of the hall that was blocking off the adjoining exhibit, closed for renovations. I lifted the tarp and crawled underneath a few moments before the museum guards showed up, drawn by the commotion. I stood by the covered doorway and listened to the guards ask the man if he was all right. They encouraged him to stay still, but as soon as they radioed down for assistance, I heard him pull himself up and flee the room. Owen and I snuck out unnoticed into an exhibit on jazz, where patrons gathered around various 2D projections of famous musicians and listened to them perform through rented headphones. Owen had already transformed us into another pair of patrons. He had taken my criticism of his tourist disguises to heart, but only in the sense that he was now deliberately attempting to get a rise out of me. I looked down to see that I was now the attractive young woman, though her Mickey Mouse sweatshirt had been replaced with a baggier one bearing in hot pink letters the enigmatic slogan just ploppin'. Owen was a tall, gangly man with buck teeth and freckles. He wore cargo shorts that came down nearly to his ankles and a black, tight-fitting, sleeveless t-shirt. Despite the signs everywhere prohibiting flash photography, he stopped every so often to raise a gigantic camera and snap pictures with a flash that made a powerful walloping sound. He approached a projection of Nathaniel Tate in the middle of a ferocious drum solo and called over to me in a nasal exaggeration of a Midwestern accent. "Hey Tammy, look at I'm go." None of the museum employees seemed to take any special notice of him. He even paused to snap a picture of two nervous-looking guards as they patrolled the room. "It's a good thing we're keeping an eye on this place," he said to me. "The security stinks." He kept snapping pictures until we reached the cafeteria, a sunlight room on the 4th floor with cafe tables and large tropical plants. We found a table out of sight and pulled out the notepad. The first few pages were stained with the man's blood, but as I continued to flip through, I saw that it contained a list of physical observations about the museum. He had almost every room mapped out by hand and had dutifully identified which were load-bearing walls and which were only dividers. Several rooms contained central pillars, and for these he had labeled the position of each with a check mark. We only had to glance at the notes briefly to know what they were. Their various calculations and focus on internal support suggested that these were the plans for demolition using explosives planted inside the building. One page bore the museum's address and the date of the parade under the phrase Lau Ordon O.D.T.K. Owen translated it, "By order of T.K." I recognized the initials right away. There it was, plain but befuddling. One of the most brilliant civic planners in the country was organizing a plot to destroy a beloved institution in his own city. Owen leaned back in his chair, looking lost in thought. "What are we supposed to do?" I said. "We know what these drawings are, but the police won't." He took a moment to send a few warnings to the MPD, though he knew I was right. We had no proof, no real details. Owen went quiet, concentrating, before eventually breaking into his toothy tourist grin. "I'll tell you what we'll do, Tamers," he said. "We'll stop them ourselves." He raised his camera and the flash went off, blinding me for a moment. That's it for part 11. Thank you everybody so much for coming. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.